Hello, we're going to talk about comparative politics terminology and use it to talk about the United States so that you can learn these terms within a broader context that makes sense to you. So, when we talk about the United States, one of the first categories of AP comparative politics is this idea of sovereignty, authority, and power. So, looking at the US case study, it's first important to note that we have a written constitution. That is not true of all of the countries that we're going to study. For example, the United Kingdom does not have a written constitution. In addition, our written constitution has strongly influenced the constitutions of Mexico and Nigeria, which we will study. The United States is a federal system, and other countries that we're going to study also have a federal system, including Russia, Nigeria, and Mexico. In a federal system, the national government has power, and the state governments or political subdivisions have powers, and then some powers are shared. In the United States, we have a system of separation of powers, which is different than federalism. The idea of separation of powers is that each branch has its own separate set of responsibilities. In the United States, we have a legitimate government. Legitimacy is the value whereby a government is recognized and accepted as right and proper. And the United States government's legitimacy comes from the rational legal category, in that our Constitution, our laws, and the fact that we have the rule of law and the idea that everyone is supposed to be actually judged by the same system of laws is what gives our government legitimacy. The United States is an example of a democracy. We also can be called a liberal democracy, which is a system of political, social, and economic liberties supported by competition, participation, and voting. We particularly have a Republican system of government as opposed to a direct democracy because we vote for people who make decisions for us. They make decisions on an everyday basis for us, but we elect them like once every 4 years, 2 years, 6 years, etc. We also have political institutions. Our political institutions are three specific branches. We have a president, we have a legislature, and we have a judiciary branch. In terms of our executive, it is headed by the president. The president plays two roles. The president is both the head of state as well as the head of government. That means that the president represents the United States, like is the head of government, but also oversees the day-to-day governing of the country. The bureaucracy is what the president uses to do that, in that the president is not the one who's out actually implementing the laws of Congress, but the branch that the president runs is doing that. Our legislative branch is a bicameral legislature where we have a House and we have a Senate. Our judicial branch has a Supreme Court, has state court systems, has federal court systems. Something that's unique to the American case study is this idea of judicial review, and that the other two branches can be overturned or overruled by the judicial branch using this power of judicial review. Many of the countries that we are going to study do not have a system of judicial review. In the United States, we have a civilian-controlled military. That is something that is very important to the American case study. The president, who is not allowed to also be in the armed forces, is the civilian commander, called the commander-in-chief of the military. It is historical in that most people have been the president, have had some sort of military background, but that is not always the case, and that has certainly not been the case very often in recent history, that you have to have a military background in order to be successful as a presidential candidate. And again, that is something that, particularly in Nigeria, would make it difficult for you to run. The United States has an electoral system where we have competitive elections between different political parties. We have a two-party system. We allow more than two parties to run, but really the rules are rigged so that either the Democrats or the Republicans will win most of the time. We have a system where we have single-member plurality districts. They're also called SMPs. And what that means is that whoever wins the most votes, that's a plurality, in that one district, one person gets the job. So that is a winner-take-all system. There's no partial credit. There's no second place. This is also called the first-past-the-post system, and it is something that they also use in the United Kingdom and Nigeria that we're going to talk about. In terms of our recruitment of political elites, the way that we recruit people to run for office is that, first of all, the political parties do that. But second of all, in our federal system, because we have three different levels of government and then three different branches at three different levels of government, we have many different places where people can be trained to run and get ready for higher office. So, for example, Pete Buttigieg, who's running for president, he's the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. Kamala Harris, who's running for president, is a senator. So is Elizabeth Warren. So is Bernie Sanders. Beto O'Rourke used to be a member of the House of Representatives. The idea is that, very few people start off running as president or getting sort of that higher level position. Most of our political elites are trained at lower offices and then rise higher. In the United States, we have a strong tradition of a political culture. Political culture means society's norms for political activity. The types of political values that are a part of our political culture in the United States are individualism, an emphasis on personal freedom, limited government, equality of opportunity, and free enterprise. Those things are going to really look different, our political values, when we look at places like China, where, for example, they don't have an emphasis on personal freedom. They certainly don't have an emphasis on free enterprise or individualism. And so when we pivot to different countries, we're going to see how this idea of political culture is different in these different case studies, and then also how that shapes what their government looks like. We're also going to look at the civil societies in these countries. Civil society is the organized life outside of the state, outside of the government. And what civil society can do is it can help people define their own interests and articulate them to the government. Frequently, people use interest groups as a way to do this. Interest groups are associations of people on the basis of a shared common concern or set of concerns. So in the United States, we have a lot of powerful interest groups. Examples of them would be like the AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons, the NRA, the National Rifle Association. We have lots of interest groups, and many people in the United States belong to them. We also have social movements in the United States. So the picture to the left is showing Black Lives Matter, and that's obviously a very contemporary social movement. We've had other social movements like for the civil rights movement, for the women's movement, for the LGBTQ rights movement. We've had lots of different social movements trying to highlight political concerns in our society. Civil society is important because if you have a healthy civil society, you have ways for citizens to participate outside of elections or government organized manifestations of political activity. An important aspect of a healthy civil society is that you have to have a free and open media. And so if you don't have, for example, a free and open media, then it's going to be hard for people to critique the government because they are going to have a hard time even getting access to information about what their government is doing. Also, if you don't have a free and open media, then other citizens don't even get to know that, for example, some other people are critiquing the government because they don't have access to that information. In the societies that we're going to be studying, we're going to look at cleavages. Cleavages are divisions in a society. Sometimes these cleavages can be cross-cutting, which actually are not problematic because they lead to coalition building and compromise. And in the United States, cross-cutting cleavages actually bring Democrats and Republicans together. So, for example, when we had, if we have an issue like a shooting or an issue of terrorism or like a natural disaster, those types of things, can hurt a society and can cause divisions, but they can be things that can actually bring people together. The kinds of things that political science are more concerned about are coinciding, or sometimes called reinforcing cleavages. These are cleavages or divisions that actually divide society in a way that makes it hard to be able to get unity. So, for example, the treatment of African Americans in the United States is a coinciding cleavage. The role of race in the United States is a coinciding cleavage. And so the Black Lives Matter movement would be a manifestation, for example, of this cleavage. In comparative politics, We always look at the political economy, or how do people use politics to create and distribute wealth. The United States has a capitalist system that is going to be different from, for example, some of the countries that we're going to study. For example, China is not a capitalist system. Iran is not a capitalist system. England does not have a capitalist system. Under capitalism, we have a system of private property, so the people, not the government, own property, and a system of free markets. So the US government does not set the prices for things. Those are set by private individuals or by private companies. However, we are a capitalist country, but we don't have extreme capitalism in that we do have social expenditures. Social expenditures are state provisions of public benefits like education, healthcare, and transportation. So, for example, the the metro area, we have a publicly run bus system. We have a publicly run transportation system. We have healthcare in the United States that is coordinated so that, for example, if you are a poor person, you can still get healthcare so you don't die from a preventable disease. We have federally run college scholarship programs. We have, for example, free public education, K through 12 in this country. And so the idea is that each society is going to decide how they're going to spend their tax money in a way to help their citizens. And this is going to be an area to be able to compare and contrast in our class. In that the amount of services that the United States offers is very small in comparison to the amount of services that, for example, the British government or the Chinese government offer their citizens, but might be more extensive than, for example, what the Nigerian government offers. We're also going to look at and compare the level of economic liberalization between the different case studies. Economic liberalization means the cutting of taxes, the reducing of regulation, the privatizing state-owned businesses and public goods, and expanding property rights. These are things that at different times in the United States we do more of or less of, but generally speaking, the United States has a very high rate of economic liberalization. According to the Fraser Institute in 2014, the US was the highest out of the case studied countries that we're going to look at, followed by the United Kingdom, Mexico, Iran, China, Nigeria, and Russia. And so I think that's important to understand. One of the last areas that we're going to look at when we do the case studies is that we are going to compare different types of public policy. Public policy is a choice that a government makes in response to a political issue. And so some of the main political policy issues that are being discussed right now in the 2020 presidential campaign include healthcare, immigration, college education affordability, and environmental regulation. So, for example, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have been talking about Medicare for all, that everybody in the United States should get health care and it should be provided by the government. Some of the other Democratic candidates have been talking about the fact that the government should play a larger role in healthcare in terms of making sure that poorer people get access to it, but not that we should have the federal government in control of it. And then, for example, on the other extreme of that, Donald Trump has historically advocated that there should be no U.S. government role in healthcare. Or if we look at the issue of immigration, migration is a topic that public policy relates to. And so in the U.S. presidential debate, President Trump is talking about the fact that we need to actually decrease immigration from other countries. We need to build a wall between the U.S. and Mexico, whereas all of the Democratic candidates are talking about the fact that we need to be increasing immigration, we need to be decreasing repression at the U.S. border, and we need to not be building a border wall. For college affordability, we have some presidential candidates like Bernie Sanders that are saying that we should have free college education available to everyone. We have other presidential candidates talking that we should expand the government's role in terms of making that affordable. And then we have other candidates who that's not what they're talking about at all. And then lastly, we have environmental regulation. President Trump doesn't believe that humans are the cause of climate change and has been decreasing environmental regulation and thinks that that is better for U.S. business growth. And then other candidates are talking about the fact that climate change is real and that climate change is happening now and that we are almost at a point of an inevitable turning point in what our world looks like. And so we need to take drastic governmental regulation in order to be able to slow/stop climate change. One thing that we're going to talk about in this class, even though we're not going to talk about international foreign policy, we will talk about how international issues affect domestic policymaking. So, for example, what the U.S. does at the U.S. Mexico border affects the Mexican political environment, right? What the U.S. does with NATO affects Russia and Russia's political environment. So, things like that. We will talk about how foreign policy can affect public policy. But again, from that domestic point of view, because we're studying comparative politics as opposed to international relations. So this is a broad overview of some of the key terms that we will be using to examine all of the countries in the case studies. Thank you.